Well, hello, welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so these are the money maker tomatoes. What I'm going to do is pricking them out. Now you don't want them to get too much bigger than that because tomatoes are quite fast growing and they can get quite pot bound quite quickly. So what you want to do is you want to pot up as many tomatoes as you're going to put in, plus I would suggest you make an extra 6 or an extra 7 or 8 depending on how many you're doing. But some tomato plants can go a bit sort of weird after a bit, so it's always worthwhile having some spares just in case you need them a bit later on. But what I recommend you do is do what you need and then do a few more, so you've always got some spares there just in case. Now these are about sort of 2 to 3 inches high now, as you can see, and they're most certainly ready to be potted up. Now what I've done is I've filled all of these pots here with compost. These are just the standard sort of 4-inch square pots, and what I'm going to be doing is going for the largest ones first, because they're the ones obviously with most promise. Get your finger underneath the plant, just like we did with the brassicas. And what you want to do is try and handle them by the roots if you can. And then all you need to do then is just with your fingers make a hole roughly the same size as the one that came out. Now you can plant these a little bit deeper than they were before. That's always recommended, to be honest with you. Now when you plant them into the greenhouse, what I typically do is plant them so a couple of the leaves are underground. The reason being is those leaves will turn into roots, which is what you can do with a sort of tomato plant, and then you've got more root support in the plant, so you end up with a stronger plant. And the rate at which these grow, they'll soon sort of shoot up and replace anything that you could possibly be sort of planted into the ground. But what I typically do is plant them so the first set of true leaves are under the ground, plant the leaves as well, and then they basically turn into roots for you. Right, so all I'm doing, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm just getting the plants out. I'm going for the biggest ones first. I'm keeping the smaller ones as well, so I end up with a little sort of planted with a sort of nice ball of root on. I'm handling them by the roots. Don't try to handle them by the stem or the leaves unless you really need to. Definitely not the stem. What you can do is handle them by the leaves if you really need to, but you're better off handling them by the root. Putting them in and then just giving them a reasonably good firming in. Now what I'll be doing as soon as I've got all these in is giving them a bit of water. What you need to do, because obviously you have compromised the roots by doing this, don't put them in sort of direct. If it's hot like it is today, what I suggest you do is put them underneath the bench out of direct sunlight and water them and just let them sort of settle in. You don't want them in direct sunlight because these will dry out quite quickly if you're not careful. And to give the plants the best start, you're better off keep them out of direct sunlight to start with, and then sort of bring them back into the greenhouse in a couple of days time. So I'll just leave these under the bench for now, and then later tonight I'll bring them out so they can go on top of the bench tomorrow. But they definitely need a good watering in. Right, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but what I'm doing is getting the plant, making a hole with a couple of fingers, and then put it into the hole like that, and then just knock the soil back around it. So you end up with the plant being slightly deeper than it was before. Right, so these are Moneymaker. Obviously I've got another 2 varieties. These are Moneymaker, the best variety I would say to start with if you've not grown tomatoes before. These are very easy to grow, very heavy croppers, and they give you sort of tomatoes about 1.5 to 2 inches across on average. They can get a bit bigger than that, but those are the sort of average size gardeners, solid money maker tomato size. I've got another 2 varieties that I'm growing this year as well, and I'll probably buy a couple of plants of a 4th variety. But these are most certainly the staple. And I grow about in the greenhouse probably about 20 to 25 of these plants a year. Last year I harvested around 50 kilos of tomatoes off them. So depending on how many tomatoes you need. Now the good thing with these tomatoes is you know, you can make all sorts of, you know, they're good on salads, you know, they're a good salad sized tomato, but also you can make good tomato sauces with them as well for pasta and that. So they're a good all-round tomato, these are. So that's why I recommend to grow it, and also it's easy to grow as well. Right, I've almost done it now, so I'm just getting the last few out. Obviously pick the strongest plants out of what you've got, and then if there's any left over you can always leave them in the tray to donate them to somebody else, or keep them as spares for yourself, whatever. Let's get these last few out. Now the other 2 varieties that I've got going, one's called Gardener's Delight. Now that's a cherry tomato. So these you grow it's a single cordon, so basically you take out the side shoot, so you've got a single shoot going up, and then I find that that's the best way, you know, not to get them too overcrowded, because a tomato plant will try to, irrespective of what type it is, will always try and grow as a bush. But these are best grown as a single cordon, as in just the trunk if you like, and then off there you just got leaves and fruiting trusses. Anything else, such as a branch or whatever, you would remove that as it starts to form. So what you get is a I've just had to handle this one by its stalk because it was stuck to another one. What you do get is like I don't know if you can see on there, you get the leaf coming out, and then just at the base of where the leaf's coming out, that's where you'll get the branch basically coming out of the plant. So you want to remove that so it doesn't branch out. The other 2 tomatoes I've got going are, one's called Gardener's Delight. Now that's a cherry tomato. Now you grow that one as a bush. You can grow it as a cordon, but I always grow it as a bush. I basically just water it and let it go. And then the other one is Golden Sunrise, which is very much like the Moneymaker, but it's gold in colour. It's the same size, pretty much as the Gardener's Delight, so it just gives a bit of variety. So those are the Moneymakers all potted up. So I'll put those underneath out of direct sunlight for now, and then I'll give them a bit of water, obviously warm water, not cold water, and then I will bring these into the light later tonight, and then so tomorrow they should be fine to go. So that's how you pot up tomatoes at this point of the year. Don't leave them in the tray because they will get quite root bound, and you know, the best developing off in these little pots, and then they can sort of grow on. As soon as they get to about sort of 9 inches high, then you can put them out into the ground. What you can't do is put them in the sort of growing beds or growing bags, whatever, when they're this big, because you can tend to overwater them if you're not careful. So you do need to put them up like this for now, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then as soon as they get to about 9 inches tall, then you can put them in the ground and away you go. So that's tomatoes for you. Okay, so these are the Golden Sunrise tomatoes. These are exactly the same as Moneymaker, except that they basically are golden in colour. It's exactly the same routine. Basically take out the plant just by putting your finger underneath, and then little square 4-inch pot like this. Plant it in exactly the same way. Make sure all the roots are under the ground. As I say, you can plant them slightly deeper than they were originally in the tray. If you've got 2 plants that are reasonably close together, you can obviously separate them. What I suggest you do, I've got 2 here, I'll just show you. So as you can see, that one. So I've got 2 which are basically next to each other like that. What I would suggest is just hold the stem very gently and just tease them apart like that. You want to try and maintain the roots as best as you can. like that. Make a hole and just quickly get them in, drop the roots in, make sure the roots are covered, and the other one is just there. Obviously when when they're close together like that, you've got no choice really, you've got to hold the stem, but just be really gentle, don't damage the stem in any way, shape or form. And then pot them all up, and then as I say, keep them in the shade, and then you can as soon as they grow to about sort of 6 to 9 inches high, then you can put them out into the border. Okay, so just within a week, as you can see, the broccoli has really come on, so that's definitely ready to plant out now. And this is the kale here, the Partridge kale, and as you can see, that's more than ready to go out as well. So I'll just prepare the ground and I'll put those two crops in. Okay, so this is where the brassicas are going to go. This is the first tunnel, the biggest tunnel. So what I'll be doing, basically what I've done is I've dug all the ground over, rotivated it all over, and obviously then put the tunnel here. I've just rotivated it again, to get the ground all nice and soft. And then what I've done is I've walked all over it to compact the soil down, because brassicas like this ground to be reasonably compact. And then what I've done is rake it over again to make sure it's all nice and level. And then I've just put one line up there, and basically what I'll be doing is planting in rows of 3 the broccoli up this side, because that's the side the sun comes from, and then on this side here, because the taller, the kale will be planted down here in exactly the same way. So the broccoli is probably going to go along here and along the back there, and then this bit here will be the kale. So what I'll do is I'll plant the broccoli first, make sure, to see where that gets to, and then I'll plant the kale in the area that's left. The kale grows around sort of 5 to 6 foot high. The broccoli grows to about sort of 18 inches high, something like that. So obviously what you want to do is plant the broccoli on the side that gets the sun, because that's the lower, the shorter crop. Okay, so the first one's just going to go in here. I'm just digging a hole a bit deeper than the brassica that's in the pot. So as you can see, when I put it in the hole like that, it sits just below, about 1 inch or 2 just below. Doesn't matter if you bury a leaf, that'll be quite okay like that. Then the next one, now I'm planting these reasonably close together. You can plant them a bit further apart, but I find that if you plant them about a foot apart in a grid, they tend to grow quite well that way. And I don't want them to grow too big. I want these to come to fruition and get the florets on them. So the florets are about that big, which is a nice size. And then I can put the next batch in about 10 weeks time, and then I can get like a succession of crops going. So just put this last one here, which is probably just off the screen. Right, and then the next one goes in again a foot. So I'm putting them a grid, so they're a foot apart this way, and they're a foot apart that way, like that. As I say, I'm planting them about 3 inches lower than they are in the pot, and that gives them a bit more stability in the wind. Make sure they're nice and firmed in. As I say, if you do bury some of the leaves, that doesn't matter too much. Like that. And then just carry on doing that until they're all in the ground. If they are slightly flopping over, don't worry. Within a couple of days they'll soon right themselves and they'll be growing upright again. And these will grow away quite nicely. And in about 2 weeks' time, I'd imagine these will probably be about a foot or so high out of the ground, and they'll be starting to form the top. So I'll show you them when I've got them finished. Okay, so there's the broccoli all put in, all calabrese. As I say, I've put them in a sort of grid so they're a foot apart either way. The reason I do this is I don't want the plants to get too big. I want them to come to sort of crop reasonably early so I can get a second batch in. And I find that when the florets are smaller, they're nicer to eat basically, so that's why I put it in. Also, when you plant them this close together, they tend to support each other as well in the ground, where they can sort of flop over. If you plant them further apart, you might need some support if you do that. But as I say, I do grow them closer together than perhaps is recommended on the seed packet, but this is what I find that works well for me. So what I'm going to do now is plant the kale in this side in exactly the same way but further apart. The kale plants go about 18 inches apart in like a zigzag sort of going up like that. And then all I need to do then is give them a good watering in, and I'll show you these in a couple of weeks' time as soon as they've started to grow. Okay, just putting the kale plants in now. As you can see, they're about sort of a foot or so high now. But with these kale, these sort of grow to about sort of 5 foot high. What I've done is I've put these steel pins in the ground about every sort of 2 foot or so, and I've staggered the rows in a zigzag pattern, and I put them all the way up. So there's 24 stakes in the ground now. Now what I'm going to do is plant the plants right next to them at the bottom. Then as they grow up, I'll be supporting the plants with these stakes. These are driven in the ground by about 2 foot or so, so they're nice and secure. And then I'll be tying them off at the top with some hose pipe and like a cable tie running through the hose pipe, which I'll show you later in the year, which basically stops the stalk from getting bruised by the post and that. So I'll just put them in the ground now, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. Okay, so just to show you, I've dug a hole right next to the pole, just big enough so that the plant sits about sort of 2 inches or so below the ground. Then all I need to do is fill that in around the plant like that, leaving a bit of a bowl shape around the plant. Then that makes it easy to water the plant in a few moments. So what I can do now is pull the water around the plant, and it won't sort of pour all over the place. It'll stay around the plant, making it a lot easier to water as the season goes on. Okay, so this sometimes happens. As you can see, this plant's gone blind. The sort of the main growing bit in the middle is literally just a leaf. As you can see, there's no sort of growing tip on the end of that. Now, there are 2 little shoots at the bottom here and here, which will sort of grow, but this is most certainly not going to grow anywhere as strong as the rest. So this is why it's always worthwhile growing a few extra spare plants, just in case you get something like this. Now, what I'll do, just as an experiment, I'm going to plant this at the end of the row here. And then I'll water this exactly the same as the other plants, and then in a few weeks' time you'll be able to see that this plant really is not going to do very much. It's just going to kind of bush out. It won't have a main stem growing at the top, and therefore it won't really come to fruition really. But I'll plant it anyway, just at the end of the row, but it's not going to do any harm there. And I'll show you what it looks like against the others in a few weeks' time. Okay, so they're all in and watered now. All I'm going to do now is just put a few slug pellets over the top, because when they're young and tender they are quite prone to slugs. Brassicas are, they will potentially be attacked by slugs, particularly when you put them out. In a few weeks' time, as soon as they've got themselves established and hardened off a little bit, the slugs are much less likely to attack them. But whilst they're young like this, it's well worthwhile just putting yourself a few slug pellets around the bottom of them, just to prevent any slugs actually getting at them. And I'll do the same thing with the broccoli. Okay, so you can see in the space of just a week how well the kale's now doing. Obviously these have been in about a week now from the last clip that I showed you, and on the other side here we've got the broccoli, which is coming on really well. It's probably grown about sort of 3 or 4 inches. Now this time of year the weather isn't really that important for brassicas. They will withstand quite cold weather conditions. Obviously, you get brassicas that go all the way through the winter as well. But as you can see, the kale's doing really well now. Anything that's a sort of leafy crop like kale, what you want to do is give it sort of nitrogen-rich fertilizer. Now, the best thing that I can suggest that you put on there is actually spent coffee grains. Now, if you go to a lot of coffee shops, they'll actually give it you for nothing. They typically have it in bags on the side. Now, this will do 2 things for your kale. One, it'll be a natural slug repellent. So if you put it on the ground around the bottom of the plant, the slugs don't like it. So it'll sort of keep the slugs away from the plant. So it's like it's not quite as good as slug pellets, but what it will do is it'll deter the slugs from going onto the kale. But also what it'll do is it'll fertilise the ground with nitrogen, which is what obviously promotes leaf growth within a plant. Now, with regard to the broccoli, this isn't a leaf crop. Obviously, you want the flowers, the florets, to sort of form. So when if you do put any fertiliser on your broccoli, what you don't want to do is put anything that's nitrogen rich, because the plant will put all its energy into developing the leaves and not the flow of the florets that you actually want. So you need to think of your NPK, you need to think of your potash, your potassium, in the mix, so you know, you don't want anything that's too rich in nitrogen. But most certainly for leafy plants like spinach, beet, or any anything like a cabbage or kale or anything that you eat the leaves of, you know, that's where you need the nitrogen rich fertilizer. And what I've found is the best sort of organic and cheapest way of doing it is to put spent coffee grains on the plants. So that's what I'll be doing with these in the next few weeks. So just to let you know, we're on the about the 20th of April, as you can see in the greenhouse, even with the windows open. I've got the top window and the side window open here. It's still reaching sort of 44 degrees, which is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is getting really hot in the greenhouse. The one bit of advice I would give you is, if the weather's this hot in your greenhouse, don't water the plants, because you can sort of shock them if you're not careful. What you can do is increase the humidity in the greenhouse by watering the floor. What that will do is it'll increase the humidity in the air, and it'll reduce the amount of water that the plants will lose whilst it's getting hot. Obviously, as soon as it starts to cool down, then that's the best time to water your plants. So the best time to water your plants basically is either in the morning or in the evening when it's sort of gone cool. But that's what the greenhouse is going up to at the moment. So I'll just quickly explain what's going on in this greenhouse here. Obviously we've got the hollyhocks. As you can see, these are quite big, so these really need pricking out. But I'm not going to be about for the next week or so, so I'm going to leave these till I get back. Ideally I'd prick these out, to be honest with you, because they are getting to the size now where they're ready to be sort of separated. But as I say, I'll do them in a week or so's time. The asparagus, as you can see, now is these little sort of shoots now doing really well. We've got the sunflowers at the back there. Now they've stalled a little bit. They grew to about that big, and they haven't really got much bigger than that over the past couple of weeks. So what I'm going to do is pot them up, because I think they're sort of struggling a bit with the roots. So what I'm going to do is, just to bring them on a bit, is pot them up into bigger pots before I put them out into the ground, just to give them that bit of a boost. There's some kale there that was left over. This is the Don Pedro plant. As you can see, all of those have come out now. Strawberries, nothing as of yet. This is the celery. As you can see, the true leaves are just starting to come through there. At the back here we've got, this is the coriander. As you can see, that's growing really well at the moment. Got a couple of weeds at the front here. That's the coriander. Here we've got the calendula, which are the orange flowers. Sort of, they're doing really well. Now again, what I would want to have done is actually set the ones outside. I've not got round to it yet. The reason being is I'm not going to put them in now, because for the next week or so I'm not going to be here to water, and I think it's going to be quite dry next week, so I'm going to hold off pouring the seeds in. They'll soon catch up, but as I shan't be here next week, I'll leave them until the week after. Then I can sort of, you know, give them a bit of water at night, and that just to bring them on whilst the seeds. The onions, as you can see, still doing really well. They're sort of really starting to form up now. It has been a little bit hot in the greenhouse for them, so ideally these would go outside now. But as I say, because a friend of mine is going to keep up the watering and that, I'm going to leave them in there to make it easy for him. The tomatoes, these are going to be potted up very soon. These are the money maker. Then I've got the Gardener's Delight here, and these are the golden sunrise tomatoes as well. Then, as you can see at the front here, we've got the lobelia, which is really starting to come on now. And then finally we've got the basil, which is doing alright. Again, it's getting a bit hot in here, so I'm keeping all the doors and windows open. So that's the first greenhouse. Okay, just a quick update for Comfrey tea. Now, Comfrey tea is very, very easy to make. This is basically the liquor or the Comfrey tea that you make, and basically it's very easy to make, and this is ideal fertilizer for not only tomatoes, which is what I use it for, but also many other plants. It's very rich in all of the sort of nutrients and everything that you need for many plants. So basically all I do is, if you look out here, I've got this container here. Now all of that you see in there was drained out of here earlier in the week, and in here all I've got is a tile just to weigh it down, and then you put all of the the comfrey there. Obviously this is spent, so I'm just about to redo it. So all of that can now go on the compost, and this is what comfrey looks like. So all you do is you just cut that plant down, fill this pot full of it, and then weight it down with the tile, and then over the next couple of months that'll sort of break down, and then from the tap at the bottom here I'll just be able to drain it into bottles and make more fertilizer for the tomatoes. Now obviously this doesn't cost anything at all. Comfrey is a very herbaceous plant. You need to be careful where you plant it. It seeds quite readily, as you can see. I've got one growing in the path there. There's also a couple of plants that have self-seeded around here as well from there, so those will all be dug out. But the roots go down into the ground about 4, 5, 6 foot, so as soon as it's established itself in a given area, it can be quite difficult to get rid of it, so you just have to keep digging at it till you get it out. But around here I've got another patch of it which I actually planted. Now this is next to the asparagus. As you can see here, the asparagus is here, but this has just become too sort of evasive really, and it's really pushing everything over. So I'm actually going to be digging this out. So this is what I'm going to dig out today and put into the comfrey tea maker, if you like, or the container around there. So what I'm going to do is empty all of that out onto the compost, chop all this down and put that into the container there, weigh it down with the tile, and then that'll just put a lid on. What you want to do is stop water getting in there, because that's when it'll start to smell bad. So I'll just put a lid over the top of it like that, and then just basically leave it there for a couple of months, and that'll be some more comfrey tea for the tomatoes. Okay, so that's all the comfrey chopped up and put in. So all I've basically done is cut stuff at the ground, put it in here, and then chopped it up with the spade, sort of, so it all sort of fits in the box. Now all I've got to do is weigh it down with the tile again, like that. So that'll just keep it compressed so it'll rot down properly, and then put the lid on, and then just leave that now for about 2 months or so, and then I'll be able to drain off the juice off there, which will make loads more fertilizer for the tomatoes. Now the one thing I would suggest is use gloves, because on the, I don't know if you can see, but on the comfrey you get like these little needles, and if you get them rubbing up against your arm you will get sort of irritation from them. So wear gloves, long sleeves if you are particularly sensitive to anything like that, but just keep it at arm's length, don't get it near your face, anything like that, and you'll be okay. There's nothing poisonous about it, but it is like a skin irritant. So but as I say, all you need to do is chop it up, put it in there, and then that'll make some good compost, fertilizer for the tomatoes later on. But I do try to leave this one as long as I can, because I don't know if you can see, but the bees absolutely love, you can see one here, bees absolutely love comfrey, particularly this time of year, because it's a very early part of the year and there aren't many flowers out for the bees. So I try to leave it to flower so the bees have at least some flowers to go at in the allotment. But that's the comfrey tea for later on in the year. So I hope this episode was of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments or questions you got below, and I'll always get back to you. And I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.